All right, let's do this. The man who dreamed the Titanic. In the spring of 1912, at least 19 people canceled their bookings on the RMS Titanic before it sailed. They gave the same reason. They had dreamed it sinking. One of them was Pierpont Morgan, one of the most powerful financiers in the world. Another was Milton Hershey, who had already paid his deposit. They walked away from the most celebrated voyage in history because something, somewhere in the architecture of their sleeping minds, showed them exactly how it ended. The Titanic was not just a ship. It was a cultural statement. The White Star Line had marketed it as unsinkable, a word that appeared in their promotional materials and lodged itself in the public imagination like a dare. In April of 1912, booking a passage on its maiden voyage was the single most fashionable thing a wealthy person could do. Walking away from that booking required a reason powerful enough to override enormous social pressure. 19 people found that reason in their dreams. The documented premonitions don't stop at canceled tickets. In 1898, 14 years before the ship was built, a novelist named Morgan Robertson published a book called Futility. It described an ocean liner called the Titan, 800 feet long, deemed unsinkable, carrying too few lifeboats, striking an iceberg in the North Atlantic in April. The Titanic was 882 feet long. It sank in the North Atlantic in April. Robertson reportedly said the ideas had arrived fully formed, as if from somewhere outside himself. The Society for Psychical Research in London received several documented premonition reports before the sinking was news. What makes this more than coincidence is the specificity. Robertson didn't write about a big ship hitting bad weather. He wrote about the exact scenario, the exact month, the exact design flaw. The 19 passengers didn't dream about rough seas. They dreamed about the Titanic going down. The Ian Stevenson premonition case files, compiled at the University of Virginia, document this as one of the most heavily corroborated mass precognitive events in recorded history. A novelist received the blueprint 14 years early. 19 people received the warning in time to act on it. The ones who listened lived. The question that keeps historians and parapsychologists up at night is not whether these dreams happened. The records confirm that they did. The question is where exactly the information came from. The plague that was predicted in print. In 1916, 2 years before the deadliest pandemic in modern history, a classified British military medical report warned that an influenza strain was overdue, that it would target healthy adults between 20 and 40 years old rather than the elderly, and that it would overwhelm hospital infrastructure catastrophically. The report was filed, shelved, and ignored. It was not declassified until 1998. Everything it described happened exactly as written in 1918, killing between 50 and 100 million people worldwide. The 1918 Spanish flu was unlike any outbreak before or since. Influenza was understood to be dangerous primarily to the elderly and very young, following a predictable U-shaped mortality curve. The 1918 strain inverted that entirely, killing young adults in their prime with a ferocity that stunned physicians. Cities ran out of coffins. Philadelphia recorded 11,000 dead in a single month. The medical establishment had no framework for what was happening, because the framework had been written down and locked in a cabinet 2 years earlier. The classified military report was not the only warning. In 1914, a Philadelphia physician had written that a severe flu outbreak was overdue and that eastern port cities would be the entry points. Philadelphia was among the hardest hit cities in 1918. Italian poet Guillaume Apollinaire wrote in letters from 1917 about a gray sickness coming from the east that swallowed men whole. He died of influenza on November 9th, 1918. Catherine Ann Porter survived the pandemic and wrote in her 1939 novella, Pale Horse, Pale Rider, that she had felt the illness approaching before it arrived, describing a premonitory dread she could not explain. The concept of isolating the healthy alongside the sick, what we now call quarantine containment, appears in an 1893 British Medical Journal article as a theoretical pandemic management tool. Mainstream medicine in 1918 did not practice it systematically. The communities that did, including some military installations that had read the right reports, had significantly lower death rates. A military report named the killer 2 years early. A physician named the city. A poet described the wave before it broke. The pandemic killed 100 million people anyway. When the same catastrophe is described in a classified report, a physician's forecast, and a dying poet's letters, you stop calling it coincidence and start asking who was sending the memo and why no one was reading it. The author who wrote 9/11. On March 4th, 2001, 6 months before the attacks on New York and Washington, a television episode aired on Fox. It was a pilot for a show called The Lone Gunman, a spin-off of The X-Files. The episode depicted a secret faction of the U.S. government remotely hijacking a Boeing 727 and flying it toward the World Trade Center, intending to crash it into the towers and blame a foreign enemy to justify war. The show's writers said they developed the concept from publicly available aviation security vulnerability reports. The episode was watched by millions of people. Nothing happened. Tom Clancy had already been there first. His 1994 novel Dead of Honor ends with a Japanese pilot deliberately crashing a Boeing 747 into the United States Capitol during a joint session of Congress, killing the president and most of the government. Reviewers called it chillingly plausible. It was published 7 years before September 11th, 2001. Clancy was not writing from pure imagination. He was reading the same threat assessments available to anyone with a security clearance and a library card. The institutional warnings were even more direct. NORAD's Amalgam Virgo exercise simulated a hijacked commercial airliner used as a weapon against a domestic target. The Hart-Rudman Commission's report, delivered in 2000, stated that a catastrophic terrorist attack on American soil was a matter of when, not if. On August 6, 2001, the president received a CIA briefing titled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S. Counterterrorism Chief Richard Clarke had sent a memo to Condoleezza Rice on January 25, 2001, 9 months before the attack, requesting an urgent cabinet-level meeting about an imminent al-Qaeda strike. That meeting was not held until September 4, 2001. The producer of the Lone Gunmen episode, Frank Spotnitz, said in interviews after the attacks that people associated with the show were contacted by government officials wanting to know where the idea originated. The writers pointed to open-source security documents, the same documents the intelligence community had been reading for years. A novelist wrote the attack in 1994. A television show broadcast the method 6 months before it happened. The CIA named the enemy and the intent. The question was never whether anyone could see it coming. The question is how many people saw it coming, and what that tells us about the difference between prediction and prevention. The scientist who described the atomic bomb in 1913. In 1913, H.G. Wells published a novel called The World Set Free. In it, he described atomic bombs, using that exact phrase, dropped from aircraft onto cities, creating craters of sustained radioactive fire that burned for days. He named the fuel uranium. He described the geopolitical aftermath, a world so devastated that the surviving nations were forced to create a single world government to prevent the next war. He published this 32 years before Hiroshima. The United Nations was founded in 1945, the same year the first atomic bomb was dropped. In 1913, the science of atomic energy was in its infancy. Ernest Rutherford had split the atom in 1911. Frederick Soddy had written about the theoretical energy locked inside radioactive elements, energy so vast it seemed almost mythological. Wells read Soddy's work and extrapolated forward with a precision that remains extraordinary. He didn't write about a bigger conventional bomb. He wrote about a weapon that derived its destructive power from atomic chain reactions, that left landscapes permanently irradiated, and that made conventional warfare obsolete overnight. The connection between Wells's novel and the actual bomb is not speculative. Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard read The World Set Free in 1932 and credited it directly with inspiring his conception of the nuclear chain reaction. Szilard filed the first patent for a nuclear chain reaction in 1933, and then, terrified of what he had invented, transferred the patent to the British Admiralty specifically to prevent it from becoming a weapon. He wanted to lock the idea away. He failed. The Manhattan Project scientists, several of whom had read Wells as young men, built the device Szilard had tried to bury. They detonated it over Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. Wells did not just imagine a nuclear weapon. He named it correctly, specified the fuel correctly, described the blast characteristics with recognizable accuracy, and predicted the exact political response that followed. Szillard's attempt to stop the chain reaction from becoming a weapon was itself something Wells had predicted, a futile effort by a single conscience against the momentum of history. The World Set Free was a blueprint. The men who built the actual bomb had read it. The only question Wells got wrong was the year. He thought it would happen in the 1950s. The world was faster than he expected. The television show that predicted the surveillance state. In 1949, George Orwell published 1984 while dying of tuberculosis on the Scottish island of Jura. He wrote it in a single sustained effort of will, coughing blood between pages, knowing he would not live to see how accurate it was. He set it 35 years in the future. He described two-way telescreens that monitored citizens in their homes, a government that systematically rewrote historical records, a concept called doublethink, and a political language called newspeak, designed to make certain thoughts literally unthinkable. He called the mechanism of state surveillance the thought police. He was off by about a decade. When Orwell wrote the novel, he was not speculating wildly. He had worked inside the BBC's Indian service during World War II, watching government propaganda operate from the inside. He understood how language was weaponized, how institutions rewrote narratives in real time, how surveillance infrastructure could be built gradually until citizens stopped noticing it. He was not predicting the future. He was extrapolating the present, following its logic to its endpoint. That is somehow more unsettling than pure prophecy. Edward Snowden's revelations in 2013 confirmed that the NSA's PRISM program had collected data from Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and Apple on a mass scale, surveilling private communications without individual warrants. The CIA's Vault 7 documents, released in 2017, confirmed that smart televisions equipped with cameras and microphones could be activated as surveillance devices. China's social credit system, operational by 2020, assigns citizens behavioral scores affecting their ability to travel, work, and access education. The word doublethink and the phrase memory hole are now used as technical terms by journalists, academics, and politicians at Oxford and the London School of Economics. When the phrase alternative facts entered political discourse in January of 2017, Amazon reported a 9,500% spike in sales of 1984 within 72 hours. People were not buying it as a novel. They were buying it as a field guide. Orwell didn't see the future. He saw the machinery already running underneath his present, traced its trajectory, and described exactly where it ended up. The terrifying part is not that he was right. It's that being right changed nothing. The question is whether we read the warning or used it as a manual. The prophecy carved in stone at Göbekli Tepe. In 2017, archaeologist Martin Sweatman of the University of Edinburgh published a paper in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, arguing that Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe, a carved stone column known as the Vulture Stone, records a comet impact that triggered the Younger Dryas cooling event approximately 10,900 years before the Common Era. The paper mapped the animal carvings on the pillar to specific constellations as they appeared in the sky on the date of the proposed impact. The alignments matched. Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000. It was built by hunter-gatherers, before agriculture, before writing, before civilization as we define it. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is one of the most consequential and contested debates in modern science. Multiple research teams have identified a global layer at the 10,900 year boundary containing platinum, nanodiamonds, and microspherules, materials consistent with a comet or asteroid fragmentation event. The hypothesis proposes that this impact triggered rapid global cooling, megafaunal extinctions, and the collapse of early human populations. If correct, it was the closest thing to an apocalypse in human prehistory. Pillar 43 depicts a scorpion, a vulture, and a headless human figure, alongside geometric symbols that, when mapped to astronomical software, align with the night sky as it appeared during the proposed impact. A second pillar at the site appears to encode the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle taking 25,920 years to complete, requiring centuries of unbroken astronomical observation to detect. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were not primitive. They were watching the sky with the dedication of scientists. The site was deliberately backfilled around 8,000 years before the Common Era, sealed by its own builders, preserving it under earth for thousands of years. Archaeologists are still excavating less than 5% of it. What has been found already suggests that someone survived a catastrophic event, built a temple to commemorate or record it, and then buried the temple carefully, as if they understood it needed to survive longer than they would. Someone, 12,000 years ago, looked at the sky, recognized what had nearly ended the world, and carved it into stone before sealing it underground. They weren't decorating a building. They were leaving a message for whoever came next. We found it. We're still learning how to read it. The broadcast that predicted the internet. In 1900, Nikola Tesla gave an interview to Collier's Weekly magazine in which he described, with technical precision, a worldwide wireless communication system allowing any person on Earth to transmit text, images, and music to any other person instantly, using a device small enough to carry in a vest pocket. He was describing the smartphone. He was describing it 120 years before it existed in the hands of every human being on the planet. Tesla's vision was not metaphorical. He had already begun building it. The Wardenclyffe Tower project, funded initially by Pierpont Morgan beginning in 1901, was designed to be the first physical node of a global wireless network. Tesla's system was intended not merely to transmit information, but to broadcast electrical power freely through the Earth's ionosphere to anyone with the right receiver. Morgan pulled his funding in 1903 when he realized the architecture of the system made it impossible to meter. You could not charge per unit of power if the power was everywhere. The future was unmonetizable. Morgan killed it. In 1926, Tesla told Colliers, "When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole Earth will be converted into a huge brain, and we shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance." Tim Berners-Lee, credited as the inventor of the World Wide Web in 1989, acknowledged Tesla's conceptual framework as a direct precursor. H.G. Wells used the phrase world brain independently in his 1936 book of the same name, describing a global encyclopedia, a precursor to Wikipedia. Two visionaries arrived at the same metaphor decades apart. Tesla had gotten there first, in hardware. After Tesla's death in January of 1943, the FBI seized his papers under the Alien Property Custodian Act. Tesla held approximately 300 patents. The full contents of those seized documents have never been completely disclosed. Several of his filed patents remained classified for decades after his death. Tesla described the internet in 1900 and broke ground on the physical infrastructure to build it. The only reason you experience his vision as a prediction rather than an inheritance is that someone decided the future was too valuable to give away. The tower was dismantled in 1917. The idea survived anyway, as ideas tend to do. The dream that stopped a plane. For 5 consecutive days in May of 1979, a Cincinnati man named David Booth called the Federal Aviation Administration and reported the same recurring dream. He described a large American Airlines aircraft, silver and red, losing its left engine on takeoff near a major airport, rolling and crashing in a massive fireball. He described it with the calm specificity of someone who had seen it happen. The FAA took his calls. They documented them. They could not act on a dream. On May 25, 1979, American Airlines Flight 191 departed O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. The left engine separated from the wing on takeoff. The plane rolled and crashed. 273 people died. It remains the deadliest aviation accident in American history. Before Booth's calls, the standard institutional position on precognitive experiences was that they belonged in the category of folklore, not evidence. The FAA's documented record of 5 calls made before the crash, describing it in accurate detail, forced a different conversation. Booth had no aviation background. He had no connection to American Airlines, no knowledge of O'Hare's traffic patterns, no technical understanding of engine failure dynamics. He simply kept dreaming the same disaster and kept calling until someone wrote it down. The David Booth case is the most rigorously documented precognitive event in aviation history. His calls were logged with dates and content. The crash matched his description on the specific airline, the specific engine, the specific airport category, and the specific visual details of the sequence. Researchers at Princeton's Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory, which operated from 1979 to 2007 across 650 published experiments, spent decades investigating exactly this category of phenomenon, whether human consciousness has access to information about events that have not yet occurred. Their data showed statistically significant, above-chance results that could not be explained by known mechanisms. Carl Jung spent decades documenting what he called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences occurring at statistically improbable rates, publishing his findings in 1952. He collected over 1,600 cases. Booth's case would have been unremarkable to Jung. It would have been one more data point in a pattern that science has not yet adequately explained. The FAA had the dates. They had the description. The crash happened anyway, which means the real question is not whether some people can see what's coming. It's why, when they do, we still don't know what to do with it. The simulation that ran on September 10th. On the morning of September 10th, 2001, the National Reconnaissance Office, a U.S. intelligence agency, had a training exercise scheduled, a simulation of a small plane accidentally crashing into their Virginia headquarters. It was canceled the next morning because a real emergency had made it irrelevant. At the same time, FEMA had deployed personnel to New York City for a pre-scheduled bioterrorism drill. Federal emergency management infrastructure was already in place, already operational, the night before the largest domestic attack in American history. Both agencies confirmed this publicly. The convergence of warnings around September 11th, 2001, is not a conspiracy theory. It is a matter of congressional record. The 9/11 Commission report lists 52 specific intelligence warnings received by U.S. agencies in the months before the attack. Egyptian intelligence had warned the CIA of a suicide attack using airplanes. German intelligence sent similar signals. Jordanian intelligence intercepted communications about an operation called the Big Wedding. On August 6, 2001, the president received a CIA briefing explicitly titled, "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." Richard Clarke, the White House counterterrorism chief, sent a memorandum to National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice on January 25, 2001, 9 months before the attack, warning that Al-Qaeda was planning a spectacular strike on American soil and requesting an urgent cabinet-level meeting. That meeting was not convened until September 4th, 2001, 7 days before the attacks. On the morning of September 11th itself, NORAD was simultaneously running 2 war games: Vigilant Guardian, simulating a hijacking scenario, and Northern Vigilance, which had moved radar assets to Alaska. Multiple air traffic controllers later testified that the simultaneous exercises caused critical confusion when real hijackings began. The NRO exercise, the FEMA deployment, the 2 active simulations, and the 52 warnings did not cause the attacks. But together, they form a picture of an event that was, in the most precise technical sense, predicted, named, simulated, warned against. The infrastructure to respond to it was already in the city. 52 warnings, 2 active simulations, 3 foreign intelligence services, a counterterrorism chief's memo. The question that has never been answered to anyone's full satisfaction is whether the dots were connected and the decision was made not to act, or whether some events carry so much momentum that even complete foreknowledge cannot stop them. The man who stopped. World War III. At 12:14 in the morning on September 26, 1983, Soviet Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was on duty at a nuclear early warning facility outside Moscow when every alarm in the building began screaming. The automated system reported that the United States had launched 5 nuclear missiles at the Soviet Union. His orders were unambiguous: report the launch upward, initiate the response protocol. The Soviet response would have been immediate and overwhelming. Petrov had 20 minutes before the missiles, if real, would strike. He sat in front of his console and did not pick up the phone. The context matters enormously. This was not an ordinary moment in the Cold War. On September 1st, 1983, 3 weeks earlier, the Soviet military had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, killing 269 people, including a U.S. congressman. American rhetoric was at its most aggressive in decades. President Reagan had recently called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Both sides were operating on hair triggers, convinced the other was capable of a first strike. Petrov's commanding officers would have had every political and psychological incentive to believe the launch was real. Petrov did not believe it. His reasoning was operational, not emotional. The United States, if launching a nuclear first strike, would fire hundreds of missiles simultaneously, not 5. 5 missiles made no strategic sense. He also knew the satellite system was new, barely tested, and potentially unreliable. He marked the alert as a system malfunction and waited. He was right. The false alarm had been caused by a rare alignment of sunlight reflecting off clouds over North Dakota, which the satellite's sensors had misread as missile exhaust plumes. The world did not end because one man, alone, trusted his judgment over every screaming instrument in front of him. Petrov was not decorated. He was transferred to a less sensitive posting and quietly retired. The Soviet government classified the incident. It did not become public knowledge until 1998, when a retired Soviet officer disclosed it. Petrov gave one significant interview in 2013. When asked if he considered himself a hero, he said, "I was just at the right place at the right time." He died on May 19th, 2017. Most of the world did not notice. There is no item on this list that carries more weight than this one. Every prediction here came true, and the world survived to study them, because on one night in 1983, a single man looked at every signal telling him the end had begun and chose to wait. He saved the future. The future forgot his name. 10 items. 10 moments where the information arrived before the event. A novelist received the schematics for a ship's disaster 14 years early. A military report named a pandemic that would kill 100 million people. A television episode broadcast a terror attack 6 months before it happened. A physicist built the atomic bomb from a blueprint a writer had already published. A government predicted its own surveillance state in print. A temple builder encoded a comet strike in stone 12,000 years before we had the tools to confirm it. An inventor designed the internet in 1900. A man in Cincinnati dreamed a plane crash that the FAA had on file. An intelligence apparatus generated 52 warnings about the same attack. And one Soviet officer looked at the end of the world on a screen and decided it wasn't real. The pattern connecting all of them is the same. The information was always there. The warnings were always issued. The predictions were always made by someone, somewhere, with enough clarity to write it down or carve it in stone or pick up the phone. What failed every time was not foresight. It was the willingness to take it seriously. If these cases have changed how you think about the edges of what's knowable, subscribe and tell me in the comments which item shook you the most. The ones who actually read the signals deserve to find each other. History is not a mystery we are solving for the first time. It is a message we keep receiving without knowing how to read it, until someone does.